The night of April 4th, 1958, number 730. North Bedford Drive, Beverly Hills. There were no spotlight beams. There was no director yelling, "Cut." There was only the pungent smell of blood rising from the expensive carpet in the pastel pink bedroom. Johnny Stompanato, a notorious mobster and debt collector of the Los Angeles underworld, lay on his back on the floor. He was dead. The autopsy report recorded a 20-centimeter fruit knife wound that pierced his liver, severed his portal vein, and struck directly into his aorta. The victim bled out and died within mere minutes. Standing a few steps away from the corpse was Lana Turner, the greatest sex symbol of the American film industry. But at this moment, at the murder scene, she was not a silver screen goddess. She was just a panicked woman witnessing her biological daughter, Cheryl Crane, who had just turned 14, crying with trembling hands covering her face. That adolescent child had just personally stabbed her mother's lover to death to prevent a vengeful beating. The police rushed in, paramedics arrived. The flashes of the paparazzi's cameras blinked continuously, illuminating a torn-open tragedy. The press immediately ran headlines calling this the murder of the century. But they were wrong. The real murder did not begin that night. It had been kindled decades earlier in a perfect plot of identity deprivation. Let's step back into the past. The core of this tragedy stemmed from another bloody death. December 14th, 1930. A man named Virgil Turner was brutally murdered after a high-stakes card game in San Francisco. Contemporary police reports noted his body was found in a basement, his skull smashed, his left shoe missing, along with all his gambling money. His little daughter, Julia Jean Turner, was only 9 years old at the time. Julia Jean permanently lost her father. Psychoanalytically speaking, she lost a child's only physical protective shield, leaving behind a massive psychological trauma known as a father complex. She grew up carrying that bleeding wound, desperately craving a safe anchor. But the Hollywood capitalists found her first. They stared intently at that wounded orphan girl. They did not see a shattered soul in need of healing. They only saw a potential gold mine. They stripped away the name Julia Jean, throwing it into the trash bin of the past. From the ashes of an orphaned childhood, the studio system molded a fabricated, sparkling, and absolutely obedient identity: Lana Turner. In 1937, the cinematic work they won't forget hit the theaters. The film revolved around a violent murder, but the public cared nothing about the killer or justice. Their eyes were glued to a 16-year-old supporting actress wearing a tight sweater, walking gracefully down the street. The phrase "sweater girl" was officially born. Do not mistakenly think this was an artistic title. It was a baiting marketing strategy aimed straight at the sexual instincts of the mass audience. Louis B. Mayer, the mogul who ruled the Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer MGM empire, knew exactly what kind of asset he was holding in his hands. A 7-year exclusive contract was immediately signed. In the language of entertainment lawyers of that era, this was essentially a legal slave contract. MGM owned the right to dictate Lana Turner's image, voice, schedule, and even her bodily freedom. Throughout the 1940s, this industrial machine operated at exhausting capacity. Lana Turner became the box office queen. She starred opposite Clark Gable in Honky Tonk. She scorched the screen with her lethal beauty in the film The Postman Always Rings Twice, 1946. Her ROI, return on investment, was sky high. Simply put, for every dollar the studio spent paying Lana, she worked tirelessly to bring them hundreds of dollars in net profit. Every smile, every toss of her platinum blonde hair, every pristine white dress was converted into a massive cash flow, pouring straight into the pockets of shareholders. To protect this asset, MGM established an iron-fisted control network. They applied the morality clause, a legal weapon that allowed the studio to terminate the contract if the actor tarnished their image. However, with a money-printing machine like Lana, this clause was just a farce. The studio tolerated everything as long as she continued to make movies. They had a team of fixers, media cleanup specialists. This force's mission was to blockade information. When Lana got tangled in continuous broken marriages, they wrote tear-jerking press releases. When she was drained of energy, mentally broke down, and attempted suicide, They sent internal doctors straight to her house to pump her stomach, ensuring not a single medical record fell into the hands of the police. The next morning, she still had to be present on set at 5 a.m., with thick layers of makeup hiding her puffy eyes. The public looked at Lana Turner and saw a regal life: 7 husbands, Cartier diamonds, extravagant champagne parties. But inside that shell, she was just a VIP prisoner, a commodity existing to fill the financial reports of the studio alliance. The downfall of a human being deprived of their identity was a pre-programmed certainty. Stripped of self-determination and forced to live in an illusory form, Lana slid into toxic relationships. She desperately clung to violent men, mistaking their brutal control for the protective strength of her late father. And that was exactly when the fatal trap sprang. The calculated ignorance of the Hollywood elite paved the way for a wolf to enter her bedroom, initiating a vicious cycle of cruel abuse. Spring of 1957. Lana Turner met Johnny Stompanato. He was not a dapper gentleman stepping out of Vogue magazine. He was a former Marine. He was a prime henchman, a protection racket enforcer for the ruthless mafia boss Mickey Cohen. The Hollywood elite knew Stompanato's background very well. The studio's internal security forces kept full files of his criminal record in classified filing cabinets. But they chose to stand by and watch. Analyzed from a perspective of control, a gangster taking over a lead actress actually brought a hidden advantage. He used brute force to keep her in line. He severed her social connections. He turned her into an isolated entity. An isolated actor is the easiest machine to drain. But Stompanato's control quickly got out of hand. He suffocated Lana. He stripped her finances, physically abused her, and threatened to throw acid to permanently destroy her money-making face. September 1957, the set of Another Time, Another Place in London. The climax of this manipulation exploded when Stompanato smuggled himself on a flight to the UK. A paranoid fit of jealousy drove him onto the film set. He pulled out a handgun, pointing it squarely at the face of young actor Sean Connery right in the middle of a scene. A physical altercation broke out. Scotland Yard police rushed in. Thanks to diplomatic intervention, Stompanato was immediately deported from the United Kingdom. Do you think the Power Network would protect their star after this gun incident? No. The studio's on-set report did not mention life safety at all. Their only focus was liability, legal and financial risks. Put simply, a risky liability that could vaporize millions of dollars for the studio if the film was suspended. Not a single social worker was called in. No restraining order was issued. Director Lewis Allen ordered the cameras to keep rolling. Lana was shoved back in front of the lens. She had to hide the bruises on her neck beneath thick layers of Max Factor foundation. The industrial machine continued operating at maximum speed. A woman's life was weighed against production schedules, and unsurprisingly, capitalist profit won absolutely. During all that time, her 14-year-old daughter, Cheryl Crane, witnessed her mother's entire collapse. The little girl was trapped between a mother decaying from sedatives and a makeshift stepfather who always kept a switchblade in his pocket. A family's safety net was completely neutralized by the calculated ignorance of the elite. Returning to the blood-soaked carpet on the night of April 4th, 1958. Before Stompanato's corpse even had time to grow cold, Lana Turner's first call was not dialing 911 for the police. She called Jerry Giesler. On the surface, he was a defense attorney. In reality, Giesler was a fixer, the most potent crime scene cleanup specialist for the Los Angeles elite. Giesler arrived. Beverly Hills police showed up right after. What unfolded over the next 24 hours was not a criminal investigation process. It was an information blockade charade orchestrated at the highest level. Testimonies were synchronized. All unfavorable evidence was suppressed. The motive was tightly established. A 14-year-old child wielding a knife to prevent a murder. April 11th, 1958. The hearing opened. It did not take the shape of a trial seeking justice. It looked exactly like a large-scale film set. 120 journalists. Dozens of film cameras pointed straight at the witness stand. Lana Turner stepped up. Light makeup. No fur coats. No diamonds. With acting skills forged by the system over 2 decades, she recounted the horrifying 60 minutes. The crowd sniffled and wept in sympathy. The jury delivered a verdict after just 25 minutes of deliberation: justifiable homicide. Simply put, the legal system officially recognized the fatal stab by the minor as an act of lawful self-defense, immediately closing the criminal file. Cheryl escaped a life sentence, but the court issued another ruling. The court stripped away Lana's physical custody rights. Put simply, they blatantly deprived a mother of her most basic right, to be with and embrace her own flesh and blood. Cheryl was thrust into the El Retiro Juvenile Reform Center. The child, bearing a blood-stained conscience on her shoulders, was loosely confined behind iron doors, bearing all the psychological trauma in place of the adult's rottenness. But the industrial machine had no time for mourning. What did the Studio Alliance see in this brutal pool of blood? A priceless media campaign. Lana Turner was, at this time, drowning in massive tax debt and nearly bankrupt. Universal Pictures immediately threw her a lifeline. They handed her the script for Imitation of Life, 1959. Its plot: an actress so obsessed with chasing fame that she forsakes and deeply hurts her own biological daughter. The ultimate cold-bloodedness did not lie in hiring her to act. It lay in the capitalized strategy, capitalizing on pain. They weaponized the real-life rift between Lana and her daughter to stimulate the morbid curiosity of the masses. Director Douglas Sirk did not need acting. He squeezed out Lana's real tears, her real panic attacks on set. They forced her to reenact her own failure as a mother in front of millions of eyes. Imitation of Life hit the theaters. It swept the global box office. Millions of dollars were printed on the foundation of a torn-apart childhood and the public humiliation of a woman. The machine had devoured its victim, spat out the broken bones, and turned it all into net revenue. April 17th, 1959. The Central Theater was packed. Tens of thousands of viewers across America lined up in droves to buy tickets for the blockbuster Imitation of Life. Sitting in the darkness of the cinema, they cried tragically before the screen. They praised Lana Turner's phenomenal acting as a mother losing her daughter. But no one in that crowd realized that what they were consuming was not a work of art. They were paying for tickets to see a perfectly disguised documentary, exposing the rot within the lead actress's own family. To understand the coldness of this deal, we must look back at Universal Pictures' financial records at the time. In 1958, Universal was standing right on the edge of bankruptcy. Their audit report was a mess drowning in massive debts. The situation was so deadlocked that the elites had to sell off their backlot, worth tens of millions of dollars, to the MCA Corporation just to hold on. They were desperate for money. They needed a vital boost to survive. And then they saw an exposed gold mine in the pool of blood that hadn't yet dried on the carpet in Lana's bedroom. An abnormal contract was drafted at lightning speed. Instead of paying Lana a standard fixed fee of $250,000 as usual, the studio offered a profit participation deal. Simply understood, this was a gamble. Lana would work for practically nothing, but in return, she would receive 50% of the net profits of the entire project. In Wall Street terminology, this was an extremely high-risk investment, but for the Hollywood capitalists, they knew for sure it would win big, because they had tapped into the darkest, most animalistic part of the public, the craving to witness an icon fall and bleed in real life. When Imitation of Life premiered, the film immediately swept the charts. It grossed over $27 million globally. It officially became the highest-grossing cinematic work in Universal's entire history up to that point, single-handedly pulling this studio from financial execution. The gamble was a resounding success. The profit-sharing agreement brought Lana Turner over $2 million in cash, a massive figure, equivalent to over $20 million at current exchange rates. But look at the hidden side of the balance sheet. The real price to pay was not on the checks. It was calculated by the spiritual life of a family that had been crushed. While the media system hailed the spectacular return of the box office queen, look at what the Power Network did to Cheryl Crane. The 14-year-old child who swung the knife that night to save her mother was entirely stripped of basic human rights. She was thrown into El Retiro, an isolated reform facility for delinquent youth in California. There were no psychologists. There was no healing therapy for a child who had just witnessed a brutal stabbing. 10 weeks after being confined, Cheryl broke down under the pressure. She, along with 2 other girls, climbed over a 3-meter-high wall to escape the camp. They were hunted by the police and recaptured just a few days later. A child who lost her grandfather when her mother was 9 years old had to personally finish off a gangster to protect her mother, and ultimately was labeled by the legal system as a public enemy, a prison-breaking criminal. That is where the corruption of the industrial machine lies. Director Douglas Sirk forced Lana Turner to reenact the scene of a daughter running away from home on the film set, right at the same time her biological daughter was locked behind iron bars in real life. They squeezed out the desperate tears of a mother who had lost custody of her child, converted them into cinematic frames, and then sold them to the audience. Decades passed. Cheryl Crane was finally released, quietly shifting to work as a real estate broker, carrying a permanent, indelible psychological trauma. And Lana Turner, she continued to live, continued to drape herself in sparkling outfits, but the rift between her and her daughter had been torn open in front of millions of people to the point that it could never be whole again. June 29, 1995. In an apartment in Century City, Lana Turner breathed her last due to throat cancer at the age of 74. The next morning, a slew of major newspapers simultaneously published her obituary. They called her a legend. They honored her as the gorgeous sweater girl, an eternal icon of Hollywood's golden age. A glamorous legacy perfectly framed, clean, and flawless. But we must not allow that legacy to be corrupted. Lana Turner's true life was not a fairy tale of glory. It is a scathing indictment exposing the cannibalistic nature of the American entertainment machine. That industry did not create dreams. It stripped away the identity of an orphaned girl named Julia Jean. It molded a fake persona. It stood by and ignored it when she was abused, because intervening brought no financial benefit. And when tragedy exploded, when a 14-year-old girl was forced to bloodstain her hands, the Studio Alliance did not care about justice at all. They stepped over the corpse, distorted the criminal scene into a media circus, and turned the collapse of a family into the ultimate tool to keep the capitalist assembly line printing money.